Welcome to this presentation on ME/CFS and Long Covid. What do you need to know? I'm Katrina Pears, the Research Coordinator for the ME Association. Just a little introduction about myself. I work for the MEA and I cover research updates and reviews, and now the administration of our Ramsay Research Fund. I am not a medical doctor and I have a PhD in organic geochemistry with a background within research. I've had ME/CFS myself for over 12 years, which was triggered by the flu, which I didn't fully recover from. My illness has changed a lot over the years and my symptoms have varied, and I now have 2 young children and my ME/CFS really improved with the pregnancy of my first. It's been a while since I last gave this presentation, which I hope you'll find interesting. In this presentation, I'm going to give a brief overview on what biomedical research is telling us about ME/CFS and Long Covid. It is based on the evidence-based NICE guideline, expert medical opinion, and the result of medical research. We will consider what might cause the disease, predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating factors, and explain what the research has been telling us about the underlying disease process. Firstly, I'm going to explain the key similarities and differences between ME/CFS and Long Covid. By definition, Long Covid dates back to a COVID-19 infection. For ME/CFS, a triggering infection can either be viral or bacteria, and this occurs in approximately 80% of people who can trace the onset back to an infection that is often acute. Types of infection include Epstein-Barr virus or glandular fever to influenza, the flu, to previous coronavirus outbreaks to Ebola in ME/CFS, and in Long Covid, this is COVID-19. Other types of immune system stressors that can trigger ME/CFS include vaccinations, trauma, pregnancy, or surgery. Stress, physical, mental, and emotional, or a combination of all three around the time of a triggering event or during the period of convalescence can be an important cofactor in determining whether an individual is able to return to pre-illness functional ability. This is the view that infections are most often the triggering event is being held by the ME Association since we established in 1980, and one that is gaining much wider acceptance. Research suggests that 5 to 10% of the people acutely affected by viral or bacteria infections are at risk of not fully recovering and developing a chronic disease state. Main symptoms often those triggering the infection or with additional complications or damage, often resulting in the loss of mobility and energy and an inability to perform previous activities, with a greater reliance on other people for help and support. So this slide shows the key symptom similarities between ME/CFS and Long Covid. Where Long Covid has a number of common symptoms that overlap with post-viral fatigue syndrome, PVFS, or ME/CFS. A significant proportion of people with Long Covid have one or more cluster of symptoms that are consistent with the diagnosis of post-viral fatigue syndrome, or ME/CFS. Out of these symptoms listed, post-exertional malaise or symptom exacerbation is one of the key symptoms, and this is where the worsening of symptoms occur after activity. This is often delayed in onset by hours or days, is disproportional to the activity, and has a prolonged recovery that may last for hours, days, or weeks. Research studies indicate that a significant proportion of people living with Long Covid also experience post-exertional malaise. Debilitating fatigue is often the main or very prominent symptom in Long Covid. While it has a lot of similarities to the fatigue that occurs in ME/CFS, if damage has occurred to the lungs, there may be problems with oxygen transfer from the lungs to the blood vessels. And if there is damage to the heart, there may be damage to the heart muscles or conducting systems. This may be exacerbating an underlying post-viral fatigue in people with long COVID. As with ME/CFS, symptoms often fluctuate from day to day, from week to week. Some symptoms increase or decrease in severity, whereas others remain static and new symptoms may appear as time goes on. So this slide is on the differences, and these are the different symptoms experienced in people with long COVID, who have a layer of symptoms that directly relate to the involvement of their lungs, heart, blood vessels, liver, kidney, brain and nervous system, gastrointestinal tract or skin, that often occurred at the time of the original infection and may, but not always, have caused damage to the affected function of these organs. As COVID-19 can affect almost every organ in the body, a much wider range of symptoms has been reported in long COVID than ME/CFS. In some cases, long COVID symptoms specifically predominate. In other cases, they're combined with ME/CFS type symptoms in varying degrees. The mix of symptoms may change over time in relation to both type and severity. Symptoms involving mental health, anxiety, depression, even post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, can also occur as within ME/CFS. In some cases of long COVID, the mental health symptoms dominate the clinical picture. A diagnosis of long COVID doesn't require the presence of a very significant, i.e. 50% or more, functional impairment relating to physical and mental activity that is required to confirm a diagnosis of ME/CFS. So, the underlying cause of ME/CFS and long COVID is still subject to medical debate. This is one reason why doctors hold such differing views on how people with the condition should be managed. However, the NICE guideline on ME/CFS, the DHSC delivery plan, and renewed interest in this field as a result of long COVID, we are moving closer to consensus view that ME/CFS is perpetuated by a physical disease process. So, is ME/CFS and long COVID a three-stage illness? There is considerable degree of agreement emerging that we are dealing with a three-stage process. This involves specific factors that predispose, precipitate, and perpetuate the various symptoms. So, predisposing factors, as with many chronic diseases, arthritis, cancer, heart disease, it appears that a genetic factor may play a role in both cases. While ME/CFS is not a genetic disease in the sense that it can be passed from parent to child, there is growing evidence that a genetic makeup increases the risk in ME/CFS developing when a triggering factor, such as an infection, occurs in a particular time of life. This genetic predisposition may also help to explain why there are many families with more than one member who has ME/CFS. New research on brain structure and function suggests that infections or events prior to the onset of ME/CFS may help to prime or activate the immune system cells called microglia. When faced with another infection, these priming of the microglia may make some people more vulnerable to developing ME/CFS. Genome-wide association studies, including that of DECODE-ME, are now in progress to see if people who develop both long COVID and ME/CFS have genetic factors that increase susceptibility and responses to infections, and I will cover the preliminary results of these later in the presentation. So, precipitating factors. One area there is a considerable degree of medical agreement relates to what triggers or precipitates ME/CFS. As covered on one of the previous slides, most are triggered by an infection, and for long COVID, by definition, this dates back to a COVID-19 infection. Perpetuating factors. This is where the situation becomes far more uncertain and where those disagreements emerge in relation to what perpetuates or keeps the illness going. Those, like the ME Association, that adhere to the physical model of causation, believe that ME/CFS is perpetuated by a complex interaction involving the way in which the brain, nervous system, muscles, immune, endocrine system all respond to triggering viral infections or other immune system stressors. When the infection or other event has passed, the body fails to return to its normal state. Symptoms persist and new symptoms develop, and functional incapacity continues or worsens. Those who believe that ME/CFS is a mental health or some form of somatic system disorder argue that symptoms are largely prolonged by what is called abnormal illness beliefs and behaviors, along with physical deconditioning, and that any physical abnormalities are caused by factors such as sleep disturbances and inactivity, despite the lack of evidence for this. 3 separate factors appear to be involved in maintaining long COVID symptoms. Firstly, if damage has occurred to organs at the time of infection, the heart and lungs in particular, and which have not been resolved. Second are factors that appear to be involved in the causation of other post-viral syndromes, such as ME/CFS, in particular immune system dysfunctions involving low-grade immune system activation and autoantibody production, neuroendocrine dysfunction involving the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, endothelial dysfunction, and mitochondrial dysfunction. Third is an area of much uncertainty and the possibility that some other pathology is involved, such as persisting viral infections or the formation of small blood clots or microclots. At the scientific level, we don't fully understand why many people with long COVID and ME/CFS experience such a dramatic fall in energy levels, and why they are unable to undertake any form of strenuous activity or sustain any form of physical or mental activity. This fatigability affects both brain and muscle function. It's possible that there is some involvement of both the brain and muscles and the possibility of the immune system. So it's good to see that some of the research into long COVID, which could be helpful in relation to ME/CFS, is looking at the way in which infection, brain, and muscle could all be involved. We're now going to look into the research evidence and the disease pathology. There's an array of research evidence for the disease pathology throughout the body, as shown in this diagram. The exact cause of ME/CFS is unknown, with many different systems showing some form of dysfunction. My explanations now are going to focus on some of the more interesting findings and not all of the points in this diagram, where dysfunctions have been found. Some of the studies are fairly small, and more replication is needed to reinforce these findings. If you would like more explanations for any of the detail, we do have a booklet available on our website called What Do You Need to Know About ME/CFS, which includes a summary of the research, and an updated version of this will be available soon, which includes the more recent research findings. Firstly, there is sound evidence for significant abnormalities involving the brain and central nervous system in both ME/CFS, and similar findings have also been found in long COVID. So picking some of these findings here, abnormalities have been found, for example, in the autonomic nervous system, ANS. Abnormalities have been consistently reported, and this part of the brain is not under conscious control and sends messages to speed up or slow down vital organs such as the heart, bowel, and bladder. Studies have shown disturbances in the autonomic regulation of cardiovascular reflexes in a subgroup of patients. The ANS also controls circulation, which helps to explain why many patients have problems with cold extremities and temperature regulation. ANS dysfunction may also explain why irritable bowel and bladder symptoms are also common. So the central nervous system defects have been found in the basal ganglia pathways, and these are areas of the brain which are extremely sensitive to cytokines. Post-mortem research has also found dorsal root gangliolitis, which is inflammation in part of the peripheral nervous system. Abnormal microglandular activation, which are immune cells in the brain, have also been found in ME/CFS, and this is a marker of inflammation. Neuroimaging studies have demonstrated a number of structural and functional abnormalities compared to controls, including differences in the volume of white and grey matter in the brain, reduced cerebral blood flow, neuroinflammation, and larger brainstem volumes, altered cortical volume and thickness, volumetric differences in the hippocampal fields, and neural microstructure changes. This could explain symptoms of cognitive dysfunction as well as pain. These findings have been found in both ME/CFS and Long Covid. Endocrine involvement, which is hormone-producing glands, and this is one of the most consistent findings in research, involving the downregulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, HPA. The hypothalamus and pituitary are tiny glands inside the brain that play a key role in control and the production of hormones. Studies have found disturbances involving the HPA axis, mainly demonstrating defects in the output of the hormone cortisol from the adrenal glands, which sit above the kidneys. Lower level of cortisol equals hypocortisemia. This could help to explain key symptoms such as fatigue, sleep dysfunction, and temperature regulation. Now looking into the blood and plasma. Red blood cell morphology. Research has shown that red blood cells from ME/CFS patients are stiffer and less able to change shape, called deformality, to squeeze through the small capillaries. This suggests blood flow and oxygen supply may be reduced in ME/CFS. The nanoneedle test results from this small pilot study testing the electrical impedance, which is the ability of a current to pass through ME cells in ME/CFS and healthy controls in plasma. They found that putting the cells under stress and making them work harder resulted in dramatic changes in signal. It's as though the cells were unable to keep up with the added demand put on them. Interestingly, when plasma from ME/CFS patients was applied to healthy control cells, the same signal occurred, suggesting a factor in plasma was affecting the cell functioning. We are currently jointly funding a follow-up study to this work, which is further assessing the electrical properties of white blood cells in ME/CFS. If we are able to identify differences in the cells of people with ME/CFS and healthy controls, it could help us to identify a biomarker which could be used for future diagnostic tests. So now looking at endothelial dysfunction. The endothelium is a thin layer of cells lining the heart and blood vessels. Endothelial cells release substances that control vascular relaxation and contraction by nitric oxide gas, as well as enzymes that control blood clotting, immune function, and platelet adhesion, which is a colourless substance in the blood. Impaired endothelial function causes symptoms of chronic fatigue and post-exertional malaise. This finding has also been found in Long Covid, which links with the persistent formation of small blood clots, microclots, in the tiny blood vessels called capillaries. There is now substantial evidence the amount of research There is now a substantial amount of research evidence that people with COVID-19 and in some cases long COVID have complications relating to the formation of large and small blood clots. While there is research evidence for endothelial dysfunction in ME/CFS, there is no sound evidence of this type of blood clotting in the small blood vessels. Given the lack of clinical evidence for clotting complications occurring in ME/CFS, therefore it seems unlikely that blood clotting abnormalities are involved in the pathology of ME/CFS, unlike long COVID. So now looking into the genetics, variations in DNA sequences have been identified which are involved in various processes such as immune modulation, oxidative stress, and energy metabolism. In August 2025, results were announced from the world's largest study into ME/CFS, the 3.2 million Decode ME project, which analysed over 15,000 DNA samples of people with ME/CFS. The key findings of the study showed that ME/CFS has a genetic component. Although not a genetic disease in the same sense as inherited, certain genetic factors may influence how the illness develops. 8 distinct genetic signals were identified across the genome. These signals implicate both immune and neurological pathways in ME/CFS causation. At least 2 signals relate to how the body responds to infection, aligning the common post-infectious nature of ME/CFS. One of the signals overlapped with genetic markers found in chronic pain, reinforcing neurological involvement. There was no link to depression or anxiety, with the study finding no genetic associations with mental health conditions. However, the sex differences still remain unexplained, as no genetic explanations were found for the higher prevalence in females. These are just some of the preliminary findings from the Decode ME study, and there are plans for more analysis and publication of further results. Then more recently, many of you might have seen in the news from researchers at the University of East Anglia, Norwich Medical School, and Oxford Biodynamics published a study which claims to find a diagnostic marker for ME/CFS. This study used a technology called EpiSwitch, which looks at how DNA is folded and organized into 3D spaces inside the cells, known as 3D genomic profiling. This folding affects which genes are active and how the immune system behaves. Researchers used this method to scan the entire genome across 200 epigenetic markers that were consistently different in people with ME/CFS compared to healthy controls. These markers are linked to immune system activity, inflammation, and energy metabolism, all areas thought to be involved in ME/CFS. Unfortunately, this study has some major flaws behind its big claims, with this method only being validated on 47 people with severe ME and 61 healthy controls. And there is a need to validate these findings for all different severities of ME/CFS, sedentary controls, MS controls, and other inflammatory conditions. Nevertheless, it does strengthen the case that ME/CFS is a biological illness and not psychological. There's also evidence for changes in the gut microbiome. Gut dysbiosis means an imbalance of gut flora diversity, not enough beneficial bacteria, and an overgrowth of bad bacteria. However, studies in this area haven't established whether the microbiome changes cause or contribute to the development of ME/CFS and resulting symptoms, or whether these changes are in fact caused by patients being ill and unable to maintain a healthy, balanced diet, for example. Similar findings have also been established in long COVID, where a reservoir of persisting viral infection and gastrointestinal tract has been suggested, with one research group concluding that COVID-19 can affect gastrointestinal tissues and is associated with gastrointestinal symptoms. So now looking at the heart, cardiac output, some studies have found results suggesting low cardiac output as an explanation for poor physical stamina and chronic fatigue as a symptom. There is also some evidence of hypertension, low blood pressure, especially on standing, which could explain symptoms such as fatigue, dizziness, cognitive issues, tremors, and nausea. So now onto the immune system. Activated immune systems and cytokines is one very interesting overlap between long COVID and ME/CFS, is the involvement of immune system chemicals, cytokines, which cause inflammation and many flu-like symptoms that are associated with any acute infection. Cytokines are proteins that signal between cells and help to control inflammation and immune responses. They are produced by immune and non-immune cells, and they are several different types with a variety of functions. In ME/CFS, evidence indicates that an ongoing cytokine response involving what are called pro-inflammatory cytokines fail to switch off after the initial triggering of infection. Whereas in the acute stage of COVID-19, there can be a cytokine storm, with the massive overproduction of cytokines causing inflammation in the lung and serious respiratory complications. So autoimmunity, some studies have found activated T and B cells, as well as increased incidence of autoantibodies, which are immune cells that attack tissues of your own body instead of targeting foreign cells such as bacteria. Although whether ME/CFS is an autoimmune disease like multiple sclerosis, MS for example, is still being debated. Viral reactivation. There has been conflicting evidence over the role of human herpes virus, HHV, in ME/CFS and long COVID. A common HHV is Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, which often results in glandular fever and among the top recognized triggers that lead to the development of ME/CFS in susceptible individuals. HHVs can remain dominant in the body after the initial infection has passed and can reactivate because of immune system stresses, which may be causing the continuing or worsening symptoms and disability. Evidence of this has been found in both ME/CFS and long COVID. So now looking at metabolism and metabolic pathways, recent studies have found abnormalities in several metabolic chemical pathways, particularly those involving glucose metabolism, suggesting that there may be problems in converting glucose to energy. Metabolic studies have shown that looking at chemical reactions at the cellular level, these are high output studies, meaning a lot of data is produced, which provides a high chance of finding significant results. So very lastly, we're going to look into research evidence for mitochondria, cellular bioenergetics, and exercise physiology. Mitochondrial dysfunction, energy or lack of, is a significant concern in ME/CFS and long COVID. There's growing evidence of the dysfunction in the mitochondria, which are often called the powerhouse of cells, and they're specialized structures that produce most of our cellular energy. Muscle biopsies have shown evidence of mitochondria degradation, deletions of mitochondrial DNA, which is DNA located inside your mitochondria, which is inherited, and the reduction of mitochondrial activity. post-exertional malaise, PEM, which is the key hallmark symptom in ME/CFS. And exercise physiology research has demonstrated that via a 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test, CPET, and this can objectively confirm the presence of PEM and could be used as a diagnostic test. This testing method has determined that PEM cannot be due to inactivity or deconditioning. Research using metabolomics has shown that ME/CFS patients have a different response to exercise, which affects their ability to recover to previous functional ability. So we need to advance ME/CFS research, and for this, we need much larger studies in order to see definite results and the removal of any false positives. We need more studies comparing ME/CFS and long COVID, well-defined patient cohorts, and greater use of sedentary and other relevant controls to have a greater representation of all ME/CFS severities. We need to identify subgroups, as there is a general consensus among researchers that there are several subgroups of patients which represent slightly different symptoms and pathologies. These need to be defined in order to study them separately. We need to use new technologies, including the use of genomics, metabolomics, and proteomics to find out what is happening at a cellular level. Collaboration between different areas of research in order to see the whole picture. And most of all, we need more funding. The Medical Research Council, MRC, regards ME/CFS as a research priority and issued a highlight notice in 2011 to encourage research applications, but very little has happened despite this central encouragement. In July 2025, the Department of Health and Social Care, DHSC, issued a delivery plan on ME/CFS, aiming to boost research, improve the attitudes and education, and enhance the lives of people living with ME/CFS. However, there's been a lot of disappointment that this plan does not go far enough. For example, there's no ambitious long-term research strategy, meaning it's likely that most research will be continued to be funded through the charity sector. The ME Association supports biomedical research by issuing grants to suitable applicants via the Ramsay Research Fund. The MEA has always prioritised research investments where funds have been available, especially when investments have been notoriously hard to find from non-charity sector sources. In the past 40 years, and thanks to the generosity of our supporters and our commitment to biomedical research, we have invested over 4 million in research studies and infrastructure projects, including that of the UK ME/CFS Biobank, encouraging scientists to take interest in the field and to advance our knowledge of ME/CFS and more recently, long COVID. This equates to an average spending of $108,000 per year. In recent years, the charity has retained funds so that it can invest in bigger and better research projects. Soon, we will be announcing our investment into the largest single study we have ever funded before, marking the recognition that in order to advance this field, we need to support bigger and better studies. So in conclusion, the most widely accepted model for ME/CFS is that it is a complex, multi-system disease that is often triggered by immune system stressor, commonly an infection, in a genetically predisposed individual. The disease is then perpetuated by an interaction of various changes in the brain, muscle, immune, and endocrine hormone-producing systems. We need a better understanding of the underlying disease pathways and the various clinical and pathological subgroups, and we are now pushing for new research investments. However, important clues have emerged and the new types of drug treatment are being assessed on the basis of these abnormalities. Research provides us in the best chance we have of really improving the lives affected by these debilitating illnesses and preventing them from developing in the future. The need for better research is being taken seriously in the UK, and we hope that effective forms of treatment will eventually emerge. The COVID-19 pandemic has served to highlight ME/CFS, and the ME Association were the first to draw attention to the similarities with long COVID. The serious nature of the pandemic and the much larger number of people affected initially led to a fairly quick response from governments around the world. We are now in the situation where an increasing number of scientists and clinicians are viewing ME/CFS and long COVID as similar post-infectious syndromes, and we are now seeing more people whose trigger was COVID-19 being diagnosed with ME/CFS rather than long COVID. Thank you again for listening. Again, if you want any more details of the points raised on my slides, you can find this in our booklet, What Do You Need to Know About ME/CFS, which includes a summary of the research which was presented here, and an updated version will soon be on our website. I've also linked a few resources on our next slide, including some of our more detailed research reviews. I'd be happy to take any questions. I'm going to pass it back to Helen now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Katrina. If you could just stop sharing, that would be great, and I can have a little look at the questions. There's quite a few comments in the chat already, mainly people sharing some experiences there. Just people kind of saying that there's obviously, sort of like a link with conditions. So having had ME and CFS and fibromyalgia for 22 years, that started after having shingles, which I'm sure is a very common, thing. Diagnosed with fibromyalgia in 2021 and functional neurological disorder in 2024. Interest in how the brain and body respond to trauma and events. This person's saying that sadly FND is sometimes considered as a psychosomatic condition, which to a degree it is, but the physical symptoms are, sort of overlooked. Is that something that, sort of you hear, a lot of at the ME Association?
So I more deal with the research side of things and not like we have ME Connect where people respond, and I don't really know what sort of questions they respond to. They only pass things on to me if it's research related that they can't answer themselves.
So I would imagine that there might be more on the website, sort of around that, and people can get support through the ME Association, around that. Someone's saying that this is how the FND was explained to them. Nothing wrong with the hardware, which is the brain and organs, but more of a software issue, as in the wiring of nerves and brain signals. Just a lot of comments here around research showing a correlation between different conditions. So this person carries Fragile X syndrome gene, and research shows a correlation between this and MD, CFS and fibromyalgia. Just trying to see if there's any kind of questions in these. Yeah, it's really interesting, sort of people sharing experiences within the chat, which is really helpful. So a question, so it seems like obviously it's a basket of fluctuating symptoms. Is there any evidence or research going on that it kind of contributes to enhanced psychiatric symptoms like anxiety and depression?
So our view at the ME Association is that the symptoms such as fatigue, pain, are contributors to mental health conditions, not cause mental health conditions. As a result of living with a very debilitating illness, causes mental health conditions and psychiatric symptoms.
Yeah. And are there any statistics on the number of patients who were diagnosed with ME/CFS pre-COVID compared to post-COVID? that you know of?
It's been we've been trying to get a updated number of people who have been affected in total with ME/CFS. So for years we've used the figure that in the UK 250,000 people were affected, and we're now been updating that and have an updated figure on our website. So I think it's really hard to say the statistics because it's not often recorded properly by the GP, so it's then often hard to get the numbers. So I think probably there are some estimates, but I don't think they're going to be very accurate. And I don't think necessarily our figures of how many people have ME/CFS are very accurate because it's very hard to achieve.
Yeah, and I guess increasingly it might be the case that people aren't diagnosed with COVID because of, sort of, obviously, it's self, it's not, you don't have to test anymore. So, I guess in that sense, people will have viral infections, but not necessarily know, whether it is COVID or, sort of a different viral infection. But I presume that if there is sort of evidence and research, it'll be on your website.
Yes, definitely. Definitely there are some figures available, but how accurate they are is very hard to say.
Yeah. Let's just have another look. Sorry, I'm just reading through some of the questions. Are there any new research on what supports people to manage ME or CFS?
So there are some studies. There's a lot of things that have been tried in papers. We have a booklet on how to manage ME/CFS on our website, which will probably give you the best answer to this question of things to try. But the most important thing is pacing, and that's the thing that most helps people manage. Obviously, it's not a cure, but it is how to manage day-to-day activity. We are currently funding a study on dysautonomia protocol, which is changes in standing and posture which affect ME/CFS people. And that's looking at things like salt intake and magnesium intake. And hopefully we will have an update from that research very soon. So that's, helping to manage symptoms of ME/CFS.
Thanks for that. I think perhaps what we can do is get the link for that information on the website, and we can send that out along with the slides as well about that information on PACE. And I think at one of the last sessions that we did some time ago, there was a little bit of information, sort of on that, which was really useful. So we'll get that sent over to people. Question, will the recording be available to view later? Yes, it will be. We usually put that on our website once we have sort of got the finished product, and that'll be available more than likely from next week on our events page. And there's another question around, has there been any findings on biomarkers for ME/CFS or long COVID?
So that is definitely very much work in progress. We have no definite biomarker yet. The ME Association is currently funding 2 studies into biomarkers. I talked about the biomarker study that was recently published, and that was all over newspapers claiming to find a biomarker. But they said it needs a lot more work to actually prove that it can test for all severities of ME/CFS and also rule out ME/CFS compared to inflammatory conditions. That's one of the main problems with ME/CFS. There is no diagnostic test or no biomarker that has been found yet.
Thanks for that, Katrina. There's so much technical language in this, and obviously I'll try my best to actually, sort of read that. But is there any evidence that ME/CFS can be triggered by phosphodiesterase inhibitors and such as sheep dips and/or insecticides or crop sprays? Does that mean something to you, Katrina?
I'm luckily reading the question that you're reading at the same time. Not that I know, but obviously there's a lot of other triggers other than infection. So there might be another subgroup of people with ME/CFS who have been whose ME/CFS has been triggered by chemicals. I think it's probably more than likely that some people would have ME/CFS as triggered as that. People with ME/CFS tend to have chemical sensitivities as well, so that kind of relates into that chemicals triggering ME/CFS.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, there's just a post there that people can access from a helpful link within the chat. It's a good fatigue management course, and there's a link there. Thank you for that. And this might not be a question for you, Katrina, but it might be something that, sort of is more, I guess, around the kind of support side of things. Should patients with ME be fully managed by GPs? I know of patients being assessed once by a specialist centre and then passed back to GP with diagnosis confirmed but no follow-up. So I guess that's more around whether patients with ME should be treated and monitored under secondary care or primary care, and there's an issue there, I guess, about people being discharged straight away. Would that be a question for you, Katrina, or is that something that would more be...
I don't completely know the answer on this, but I can say you're definitely right, because that's exactly how my ME was managed. I was diagnosed by a clinic and then just passed back to the GP, and then the GP has never asked me in 12 years how my ME/CFS is. It's a bit of a postcode lottery though if you have an ME/CFS service in your area. So whether the GP will manage you or send you to a service is very dependent. And also, what can they really do? Because there is no treatment. It's all about management, and they will tell you, well, you just got to better manage it. And that's what the message I've always had from a GP. You've got to better manage it. So
yeah, I guess it's about that sort of specialist knowledge as well, though, isn't it? I think presumably something like the NICE guidelines would be a good thing to maybe consult, around that. There'll possibly be some NICE guidelines around management. Again, we'll see if we can dig anything out from the ME Association website that kind of helps with that. And if so, we'll put that in the, sort of the links that we send on with the slides. It's a worrying time though, isn't it? As you say, kind of just being discharged, especially if potentially, sort of the support isn't there from, sort of the primary care service. So someone's just saying that they found a Facebook group who are adamant ME and CFS are different and shouldn't be lumped together. Is that a common thought?
I think that's very dependent on the group of people and the approach. I think the problem is that the name CFS doesn't really describe the illness very accurately. People then think, it's not serious, whereas a lot of more people want it to be called ME because that takes the illness more seriously. So I think it depends, who you're talking to, and there's a lot of different groups around. And obviously we can't test the difference between them, so how can we say they're different? We use the term jointly, and that's what a lot of people get diagnosed with, is ME/CFS.
Yeah. Yeah. And the next question, there's quite a lot of questions today, which is fantastic. Some really engaged people here today. So I'd be keen to know where you think more research should be targeted based on current knowledge of available research. Does the ME Association have views on which research areas should be prioritised?
So firstly, current knowledge. Well, it's very hard to say because we don't have a diagnostic marker, and all research that has looked at a diagnostic marker hasn't found the answers yet. Treatment is hard to address when you don't know what causes ME/CFS. I definitely think we need a joint approach between long COVID and ME/CFS. I really like the large scale studies that look at metabolomics, proteomics, genomics, because I find those large scale studies are more likely to find something wrong than the smaller studies just looking at one bodily system. I definitely think there's something going on with the immune system. So I think that research into that area should be targeted, but then that's a huge area. So where do you look in that area? So definitely it needs to involve a multidisciplinary approach, which is huge, a lot of money needed. We don't currently have a view on which areas should be prioritised. I'm trying to write a research strategy document at the moment, but we don't tend to have a view. We judge research applications as they come in and their merits and what funding we have available at the time.
Thank you for explaining that, Katrina. There's a question around muscle spasms and ME CFS. Is there any, sort of research into that? Or it says, how often do you see that?
So I don't really know much about that because, again, that's not my kind of area, but it is definitely related to ME CFS. Probably something more to ask ME Connect, who deal with incoming questions. Don't off the top of my head know any research in that area.
Yeah, so again, might have a little look on the website and see if there's any information around that. Someone's mentioned pacing and the spoon theory. I think that's based on what you were saying before, Katrina, about the pacing for physical, sort of activity.
Yeah.
There's another message just, I guess, around has come direct to myself, just sort of saying around awareness of ME/CFS being sort of sometimes a little bit poor amongst some GPs. Do you know if there's anything being done to educate health professionals as per the government's final delivery plan, or is that something that's, again, possibly not necessarily a question for the research?
I think that's in progress because obviously that delivery plan only came out in July. So that's definitely something that's being worked on by the research groups. And I do seem to remember we did ask to look at what this was going to involve, but we haven't seen what this education section will involve yet.
Yeah, so that might be more to come in terms of, as you say, the delivery plan. Sorry, I'm just trying to go through because there's a lot. I just want to make sure I haven't kind of missed something. Being told there are no longer any long COVID service commissioned by North East North Cumbria ICB, in part due to removal of NH ring fencing of adult long COVID funding. Also been told North of Town fatigue service based in Newcastle will not accept referrals from patients whose symptoms began of a COVID infection. That's quite a long question, but I wonder whether that's something that, as a health watch, we can maybe try and find out a little bit more about, just with it being sort of like a local thing. So perhaps what I'll do is pop our email in the chat, and we'll maybe, sort of see if we can answer that. But I guess related to that, the question is, has the ME Association seen situations like this elsewhere? And do you think ME CFS triggered by COVID should be treated differently from ME CFS triggered by other infections like EBV? Is there evidence to support treating two types of patients differently?
So I have obviously heard about the long COVID services being shut, and that has been a problem. Obviously, we're not very pleased with that. We think that there are two types of post-viral fatigue syndromes. And so, yes, they should be treated similarly, but obviously there's a layer of symptoms in long COVID which relate to the initial COVID infection, which need different services than those with ME/CFS. So I fully think they should be under the same service because there's a lot we can learn from both groups of people. But again, it's hard to change policy, and I think a lot of people want to think they're different still and not, the same to group the long COVID people in with ME/CFS. I think that's, quite a problem.
Yeah, and I guess, as you say, postcode wise, there might have been differences in the long COVID clinics and how they, sort of operated in different, sort of parts. I think in the northeast, it seemed mainly to do with like respiratory, sort of issues, sort of rather than, sort of the fatigue side of things. But maybe I haven't, sort of had an update on that sort of recently. So that's interesting. Maybe that's something that we could find out a little bit more about. So as I say, we'll pop our email in the chat. And if the person who's asked it maybe wants to kind of follow up on that, we can try and get a little bit of an update for you. Oh, Tim's already done that. Thank you very much, Tim. Okay. Yeah, so there's just a few thanks there. A few people's had to go off, but saying thanks for sharing. Very difficult for patients who don't have support and knowledge. And I guess just to reiterate, this session has been very much around, sort of the current research, but the ME Association, as a charity, do also have, sort of support services, and it's really important that if people on this call or that know of people who, sort of like need support and resources, that are those available, sort of via the charity, aren't there, Katrina?
Yes, definitely. We do a lot of different things as a charity. We're not just research. A huge part is supporting people and providing resources. We have a lot of free resources and booklets on our website.
Yeah. So someone's just basically saying that in their health board, the long COVID service is very limited, and it's branching to include ME, CFS. And we've got which website will we find the slides, etc. Please. Yes, so just to reiterate, we will email out the slides after the event. The recording will be available on the website, and the link is there for people to look at that next week. To what extent do you think the impacts of the PACE trial still influence ME CFS patient care in 2025?
I still think it has a lot of impact. I think the group of people who did that research have very loud voices, and they still keep trying to get the NICE guidelines scrapped. So yes, I do think it has an impact still. And I think, it's hard to change people's view and opinion of ME/CFS and what causes it. I think you need to advocate a lot for yourself if you have ME/CFS. So knowing the research and knowing what's right and what's wrong and what's being disproved is very helpful to say, no, this isn't correct now, this trial.
Thank you for clarifying that, Katrina. And just a few other, sort of thanks. People sharing experiences. Obviously, someone saying son suffered for years, seeing what he's gone through. Are there any other questions just before we are due to go? It's 2 o'clock now, so if not, I'd just like to thank you all for sort of coming along today, and Katrina for going through that wonderful presentation. Thanks so much. I'm sure the people on the call got a lot from that, and please just kind of keep in touch with us. If you have any other, sort of questions, there's lots of resources on the ME Association website that you can access. And as I say, you've got our contact details as well if you wanted to kind of follow up on anything. So thanks for giving up time on Friday afternoon, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.